So when laws were made, right, no one's contemplating Bitcoin mining. No one's contemplating digital currency. No one knows the Bitcoin protocol, right, when they're creating laws. And same with AI. So these legislatures and these judges, also in the judicial branch, they're seeing some of these things for the first time. So a lot of these are cases of first impression. So you are setting a precedent now in these lawsuits. That becomes a persuasive authority. So then someone in another state can say, well, this judge ruled in this way, and this is what you need to do here. And, you know, the judge, if it's persuasive authority, they can just kind of use that as an analogous thing. But the judges will look to something else, especially when it's a new thing that they don't understand. And so the laws that and the orders that we get from courts now, the judgments that we get from courts now, any of these verdicts and any of the nuisance litigation that happens will be used as precedent moving forward. And that goes for all of them. So, I know there's competitor mining competitors, but really what's set for one is kind of set for a lot of them. So everyone kind of needs to be on board. And
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. My name is Walker, and this is the Bitcoin Podcast. The Bitcoin time chain is 884622, and the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Today, my guest is Paula Pendley. Paula is an attorney, and some of her newest clients are Bitcoin miners. Paula and I dug deep into her work as a lawyer defending Bitcoin miners and the types of legal attacks miners face. But we also discussed the use of AI in law, why no one trusts the legacy media anymore, the changing regulatory landscape, and more. But before we dive in, do me a favor and subscribe to the Bitcoin Podcast wherever you're listening, and make sure to subscribe on YouTube or Rumble as well. Just search @WalkerAmerica. And if you find this show valuable, consider giving value back by giving it a zap on Nostr or a boost on Fountain. You can find me on Nostr at primal.net/Walker and this podcast at primal.net/Titcoin. Without further ado, let's get into this Bitcoin talk with Paula Pendley. Paula, welcome. Thanks for coming on here. This is only your second ever Bitcoin podcast appearance. Is that correct?
that is correct. Yes, my first one was on Coin Stories, Natalie. And so thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm sorry, this show may be a little bit of a step down from Natalie's, but I promise we'll still have a good time.
Of course.
I met you through Natalie, and it's been great getting to know you a little bit. And I wanted to have you on because honestly, I think the perspective that you bring is really fascinating. I think that people are paying a lot more attention right now to kind of not just their own Bitcoin stack, but like what is actually happening in the broader ecosystem and what sorts of things may be impediments to that. And you specifically deal with a lot of companies who are fighting legal battles, and those companies are ones that are trying to promote the adoption of Bitcoin or to mine Bitcoin or whatever it may be.
Right.
And I want to get into some of that and just like some of the legal challenges that you've dealt with. But I want to start out a little bit with just who are you? How did you get here today? How did you get to be an attorney that is now focused on Bitcoin and kind of quite immersed in this Bitcoin ecosystem as well?
Right. Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, I'll try to keep it interesting for the viewers and listeners. So I'm from Louisiana. I went out to law school in California and undergrad out there. I started practicing at a firm that I was working at when I was in law school. And I did a lot of construction work and kind of accident prevention, premises liability type cases. I ended up laterally moving to another firm, and that was in 2012. And I tried my first case to verdict in 2014. And ever since then, I've really been predominantly a trial attorney. I handle a lot of litigation disputes, like coast to coast. I'm licensed in California and Texas, but there's something in the legal world called pro hoc vici. And so you can pro hoc into, it's a Latin term. You can pro hoc, of course, into certain jurisdictions. And so you just essentially move the court, or you file an application to the court to allow yourself to practice law in a foreign jurisdiction in which you're not licensed for the limited purpose of just trying that particular lawsuit or case. So I've had to try cases in New York and Connecticut, Carolinas, places like North Carolina, South Carolina. So all over the place. But now I live in Texas. I moved to Texas in 2020. And so how I got into the Bitcoin world and how did Bitcoin become my legal practice is I went to the Bitcoin conference in 2021 down in Miami with Natalie. Natalie Brunell orange pilled me. She and I go back since undergrad. We went to undergrad together and just have been friends ever since. And once I went to that one conference, I mean, I'd heard Natalie talk about Bitcoin for a while, but it never really stuck until I really got immersed in it and, met people in it, understood a little bit more, took some time to educate myself in it, and then started working, like doing the estate practice. I thought, a natural thing that I was hearing in the community was people that were kind of worried about how to properly secure and then transfer and allow their loved ones to inherit their Bitcoin. So and how do you securely transfer that private key? But when I started to do that work, I learned that it's a really niche practice and it's very, very state specific. And it's mainly in boutique firm practices. So I then, when I really, really got involved helping Bitcoin businesses and generally data centers, miners, was when a lot of the miners started moving to Texas. And, Governor Abbott here has welcomed a lot of them publicly invited them to come to Texas. Texas is obviously a very friendly, business-friendly state. It's got cheap, abundant energy, lots of land, and then also I think part of the catalyst too was when China kind of banned the miners. And so I think a lot of the miners started refocusing and trying to figure out where they're going to relocate. And a lot of them came to Texas. And at that point, of course, they need counsel to help them set up legal frameworks and set up the processes and assist with any outside litigation and any outside disputes. Because, as new technology evolves, there's always, contract disputes, all sorts of things that people maybe not even thought about. So there was an increasing need for specialized legal expertise, and it's hard to find someone, you can find a litigator, but it's hard to find someone who's actually knows what Bitcoin is and understands it and was involved in it. So I think that's what drove a lot of people to come to me is, wait a second, like a lot of people don't understand the digital currency aspect of it. So that kind of gave me, I guess, a leg up a little bit. So, and cut me off when you want me to, but I can tell you about the cases I've handled in this like ecosystem if you think it'd be helpful.
No, it would. I just want to say, I think that's such an interesting thing because it's the same thing with Bitcoin companies who are looking for, let's say, like marketing firms or for any sort of marketing help. They can go to any number of the firms that specialize in just marketing. But those firms don't necessarily know what the heck they're talking about with regard to Bitcoin. And that's just that creates problems. And I imagine it's the same thing with law. It's like if you're a Bitcoin company, you want legal representation that actually understands Bitcoin, that is preferably, a Bitcoiner advocating for you because you're just going to be better at doing your job. You're not going to have the hurdle of even explaining what Bitcoin is. You're already there. You're already orange pilled. So I imagine that that's very attractive to clients.
It just makes it easier for them. I mean, even internally here at my firm, when I bring a team together, I have to give them a little Bitcoin 101 course a little bit because a lot of people, it's still new. And we have a Bitcoin family that we have, and we're Bitcoin Twitter, and you get involved and immersed in it. And it's hard for us to step back and remember, okay, wait, not everybody is as involved as we are and has been with it for as long. But I think, predominantly now with the new administration, it's been in the news so much more. The obviously all-time highs that we've been dealing with has just really gotten people very interested. So I think there's a lot more people now out there that are educating themselves, hopefully, but and it's becoming a little more adopted. But yes, I think when, someone's out there, a Bitcoin business or a data center in general is looking for someone that could help them, they don't want to have to explain what it is. And I think it makes it easier if, you just have, enough information to be dangerous.
And you certainly don't want somebody like representing you who thinks what the legacy media has told them, which is that Bitcoin is a scam or a Ponzi scheme or bad for the environment or whatever else. Like you want somebody who's going to really be on your side and get it. And I'm curious if you can talk as much as you are legally allowed to, maybe about some of the cases that you've worked on, because I'm sure some of them are going to sound a little bit familiar to people who have followed the mining space fairly closely.
Right. Yeah, sure. Yeah, just because of attorney-client confidentiality reasons, I won't go into like certain details, but generally speaking, I do nuisance litigation for data centers. And that's been, a nuisance litigation, let me define it really quick. It's when someone is alleging that another party, the defendant, is substantially and unreasonably interfering with the use and enjoyment of their property. So, and every state has their own they'll reword it in some way, but that's essentially the common law definition of it. And so there's tweaks here and there. You have to understand the standard of care and things like that in different jurisdictions. But the main seminal cases in Texas, where I am, is a case called Crosstex, and there's another case, Blanchard, I think. It's a Sanderson Farms case. But those are the two cases that you really follow for nuisance litigation. And, a nuisance litigation is something that involves a lot of risk management. So you try to be a good neighbor to avoid lawsuits, right? So you do a lot on the front end. You have to do a good job of listening and planning and adapting to some of the concerns of the neighborhood. But at some point, sometimes lawsuits are filed and you have to defend them. And so one of the biggest challenges in the nuisance world right now as it pertains to mining and as, these kinds of plaintiff advertising that you kind of alluded to when you're talking about the mainstream media has kind of had a hostile reporting on mining in general. But even plaintiffs' lawyer advertising is also aimed at finding lawsuits. Okay, so you've probably seen it. Every state has different rules on what they can show, how plaintiffs can advertise. But you'll see all these things online where they say, okay, well, call this number if you've been harmed in this, or call this number if you ingested this, or it's a med mal thing or a cancer-inducing thing. So you call one of these telephone farms, and it's not really even a lawyer there, okay? It's that someone that's taking out a lot of your information, and then they take that information and they sell that as a lead to a plaintiff's firm. And so that's in all kinds of industries that's been going on. And so Bitcoin is no exception to that rule, unfortunately. And mining has been no exception to that rule. And so that's how they will sometimes, and then in the newspaper, so plaintiffs' lawyers will advertise and I don't want to say, but sometimes create lawsuits by power of suggestion. So ads suggest to people what they may be experiencing. And that is and this isn't just pie in the sky. This has happened in my nuisance cases that I deal with. So you're more inclined to perceive something that's suggested to you. So Walker, if I'd say like, oh my gosh, do you smell that like chocolate chip cookie or that popcorn or something? All of a sudden you're like, you're smelling for it, right? Or and then same with noise, same with sound. It's did you hear it? You all of a sudden start listening for it. You start thinking, oh, and it's so much perception and emotional involved in that. So that's one of the challenges is really just kind of battling these heavily funded other groups, nonprofits that have agendas that really want to kind of shut down mining, or the mainstream media that doesn't want to give a fair side to the story. And so people, when they don't understand something, they read an article or a headline, and unfortunately, it breeds fear. You feel like you're lacking control, and you look at all the negative things instead of all the positive aspects. So anyway, nuisance litigation is one area. Another is environmental issues. Miners, when they're setting up data centers, one of the main issues is, there's an agency in every state. They probably run under a different name, but it's like a Commission of Environmental Quality, and they regulate your air, land, and water usage. So every data center needs to be aware of the requirements for that. And then they have to report on that every year. And these are just regulations state by state. But I realized, in this practice that there's a misconception that a lot of data centers use a lot of water. And in some cases, that's totally untrue. But so we have to educate these regulators and clarify and the usage and the report on it promptly, because they do have the right to show up at, and I'm not trying to scare anyone, but they do have the right to show up at a business during reasonable business hours and and you have to allow them access to see what you're doing on the property. And these can be induced by anonymous complaints too. Okay. So who do you think's making anonymous complaints? I mean, right?
Yeah.
Consumer advocacy groups, plaintiffs, lawyers, politicians needing a platform to run on. It can run the gamut there. So that's just something that I've also had to deal with and work with. And then there's contract disputes with hosting agreements. Okay, so a lot of data centers will host third-party miners on their property, and then there's just common pitfalls that lead to disputes. The key to writing a contract is to anticipate the worst-case scenario all the time and kind of protect you from the beginning to kind of give you leverage later if a dispute arises.
I'm curious if I can ask quick, because just earlier you mentioned some of these advocacy groups and sort of I guess in your world, like leading the witness, not before the trial has even started, but like kind of priming them, let's say. And is that, I mean, some of the biggest, well, I don't know if they were actually the biggest stories, but the ones that like Greenpeace and the Sierra Club, some of these other ones that were like pushing out there with these protests that they were showing with like 5 people. Is that kind of what you're referring to? I think a lot of these were in Texas too, where they were spending clearly a lot of money to try and make it seem like there was a bunch of public resistance to these Bitcoin miners.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And another one's like Earth Justice.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they are anti-fossil fuel, and they think that, miners are harming the environment, right? But they don't tell the other side of the story, which is that, miners obviously use the surplus that would be wasted. It would go, when oil is extracted, there is natural gas that comes with it. And unless you want it to flare off as methane in the air, you can capture it and use it for electricity. And that's what miners do. They stabilize the grid, by using that. And then there's, wind, solar, hydro, all that surplus energy that we have a ton of it in Texas. And all of that surplus energy, well, if it's not captured, we just waste it. And so it's a way of using that. And anyway, so that's the other side of the story. And that's the one you have to tell. But yeah, it's easier to tell the victim story. It's just an easier media story, kind of clickbait thing. You really have to dig deep to kind of get past that. And I do think mainstream media has been put to the task recently in the last couple of years. And I think people are looking at news in a more critical eye. And this is just my opinion, but I don't know that people go to the mainstream ones as much for their news. I think people go on their phones more and want to hear from people more. So hopefully that continues, because I think that's when you really get to understand both sides of the coin.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting too. I'm curious, you said that you represent data centers broadly. Bitcoin miners are obviously like a type of data center, right? And I'm wondering, have you seen different treatment of Bitcoin miners specifically versus, let's say, a traditional data center, like a cloud hosting data center versus Bitcoin miners? Have you seen different treatment? I mean, I certainly feel like I have, at least in the media. Bitcoin miners seem to be demonized. People don't seem to really care that much about data centers. Maybe now that there's more like AI compute required, people are a little bit more paying attention. But what have you seen kind of from behind the veil in terms of the treatment of these different classifications?
I do think, unfortunately, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, just in like other cryptos, even, they just get a bad rap. And the Bitcoin world, this like the subculture of the Bitcoin world, is pretty vocal and anti-government, anti-traditional finance, distrust of banks. So the messaging can sometimes sound conspiratorial in some other worlds, right? And especially we don't want to alienate a mainstream audience. But that is why I think that maybe Bitcoiners are targeted more, because it's more of the independent thought, libertarian thinking, just anti-government, sovereign over our money, and that kind of thing just gets people, all worked up. The people that have been doing the same thing for years and years. So I do think they are targeted more, unfortunately. I think also the whole Silk Road thing kind of gave it a bad image from, years and years back, I guess. I think people just thought it was drug money. This is how you used to get drug money or something. So I think that image is getting better, but I do think there's some people out there that still think that, which means that, they kind of target a little bit more. And I'm not saying that the AI isn't going to be targeted more now, but AI is fairly new, is a lot newer than Bitcoin and digital currencies and things like that. So AI, I'm sure is going to it's something down the pike that they're thinking of and considering, and knowing that that's, going to be an issue that they're going to face as well. It's a little newer, so they're not they haven't gotten the heat as much quite yet, probably.
It blows my mind that there are Bitcoiners out there who are not yet on Nostr. Seriously, what are you doing? Just like you shouldn't need to ask permission to use your money, you shouldn't need to ask permission to speak freely. But that is exactly what you are doing if you are still stuck on centralized social media platforms. On Nostr, you can't be censored, you can't be banned, and you can't be deboosted for saying words Elon or Mark Zuckerberg don't like. And the vibes are just better. Nostr also has Bitcoin payments built in, so when you post a meme, a hot take, or a photo of your delicious steak, people will zap you Bitcoin to show you they liked it and find it valuable. And if you're a content creator or a writer or anything, you can start monetizing your work immediately on Nostr, unlike on YouTube, X, or any other centralized platform. Plus, you don't have to KYC yourself or wait till you get to a certain engagement threshold in order to monetize. You can find me on Nostr by going to primal.net/Walker, and you can check out this podcast on Nostr at primal.net/Titcoin. Primal has a built-in Bitcoin wallet, so you can literally get zapped by people for your posts, then go use those sats to buy a coffee or do whatever you want, all from the same app. Search for Primal in the App Store, go to primal.net, or check out any of the hundreds of other Nostr apps that are out there, because you can freely switch between them anytime you want. So, come join the largest Bitcoin circular economy in the world and start zapping sats on Nostr. So I'm curious, with these nuisance lawsuits specifically, what is the end goal on the side of the plaintiff? Is the goal to extract like monetary compensation? Like they want to basically get a settlement out of the Bitcoin miner, for example? Is it to shut down their operations? Is it just to drown them in paperwork so that they have to close up shop? Like, what do they actually hope to get out of it? And what is if you're representing them, maybe the result is very good for the Bitcoin miners, but have there been some negative results where the Bitcoin miners ended up losing these things and really suffering?
So the end goal depends on the lawsuit. Some will allege personal injury and they'll make a complaint for personal. I'm talking generally in nuisance litigation generally. Some will looking for perhaps some monetary compensation in nuisance lawsuits generally. Others are looking for injunctions, permanent injunctions, and an injunction would shut you down. Now, every state is going to be different on their injunctions. Some can do a limiting injunction, say requiring it. So an injunction is equitable relief. And so the judge has a little more, and the jury, depending, if it's a bench trial or jury trial, but they have a little more leniency in in essentially what they're going to rule, because they can sometimes say, well, I won't shut it down, but it has to do X, Y, Z. So you see that in different, it depends on the case. It's a case by case basis. But yeah, I mean, I've been in lawsuits where they're requesting compensation. I've been in lawsuits where they're just asking for the whole thing to be shut down. I think the ones that you'll see with respect to like the Greenpeace's, those kind of lawsuits that are heavily funded, and they have like third-party funding, and then they have government funding, they have private funding, but those, they're looking more to shut it down because they want the industry to go away altogether. So yeah, that's that. And this is what's so important right now. It's because these cases, so when laws were made, right, no one's contemplating Bitcoin mining. No one's contemplating digital currency. No one knows the Bitcoin protocol, right? When they're creating laws. And same with AI. So these legislatures and these judges, and also in the judicial branch, they're seeing some of these things for the first time. So a lot of these are cases of first impression. So you are setting a precedent now in these lawsuits that will, so it's binding if you're in state court, it'll be binding on the court of that jurisdiction. But even say there was a ruling in, a neighboring state, or it doesn't even have to be a neighboring state, but in any other state, such as like Kentucky or Arkansas, whatever, like that becomes second, like it's like a persuasive authority. So then someone in another state can say, well, this judge ruled in this way, and this is what you need to do here. And, the judge, if it's persuasive authority, they can just kind of use that as an analogous thing. But it's very, the judges will look to something else, especially when it's a new thing that they don't understand. And so the laws that and the orders that we get from courts now, the judgments that we get from courts now, any of these verdicts and any of the nuisance litigation that happens will be used as precedent moving forward. So that's why it's really, and that goes for all of them. So it's, I know there's competitor mining competitors, but really what's set for one is kind of set for a lot of them. So everyone kind of needs to be on board. And then, so I do anticipate there will be quite a lot of appeals going on because I'm going up to the highest court to get a ruling on some of these things in the states, and depending on if you're in a federal jurisdiction or in the state court. So anyway, that's one area. And then, yeah. So,
yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, so there's kind of like, this is like a unique moment where you have the birth and kind of widespread adoption of a new technology during this time from a non-technological, but from a legal standpoint. It's like, this is sort of setting the rules of the road, or at least the precedents that are going to be used legally later,
right,
to just kind of, potentially, I mean, if things don't go well, used to really punish minors. And if they do go well, allow minors to actually continue operating without needing to worry about frivolous lawsuits being thrown at them hand over fist. Is that kind of a fair summary?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so this is kind of like a key moment then right now, because it's like, if you don't win these cases now, if you don't set that precedent, it's going to cause just an unimaginable amount of trouble down the road. I mean, is it... Right. Do you see like a lot of, is there, are Bitcoin miners kind of also getting together on this and realizing, hey, look, even though we're all competing for hash rate, what benefits one of us from a legal precedent perspective is going to benefit all of us? Or do they all kind of go it alone to a certain extent?
I'm probably not privy to a ton of the conversations among all of them, but I do think, perhaps not in the legal set, like in a dispute or litigation setting, but certainly in a lobbying setting or an advocacy group setting. Like, for example, in Texas, we have the Texas Blockchain Council led by Lee Bratcher, and they, you have all these miners that are members of this council and come together to engage lawmakers to make more favorable Bitcoin-friendly laws. And so the response there has been wonderful, but it's really going to the legislature at that point. Like, for example, I either yesterday or 2 days ago, sometime this week, the Senate had a bill in Austin on creating a Texas Bitcoin strategic reserve. So that's something that they're going to be voting on. soon, and I think there's also a House bill, and there's maybe the only distinction there really is whether or not the state of Texas it'll be part of the Treasury or whether it's manned more outside of the Treasury, probably like the state comptroller, and like there's probably some checks and balances there, and someone monitoring the whole thing. But so anyway, I'm just saying that's just one example of like where minors are really coming together to create policies on both the state and federal levels. And then that also, when you start creating the laws that are favorable, then the judges they have to follow it. But another way of doing that is also in litigation. But yeah, I do think the minors, are coming together for different reasons. Like, for example, in Wyoming, they passed a lot of Bitcoin-friendly laws about self-custody and private keys and things like that. And so I think in different states, they're targeting different like laws that they want to have passed. And it's just a matter of getting them passed, educating the people in the legislature too, because that's another hurdle. So, but anyway, I don't think the minors are restricted in that participation, but I'm not sure that they all get together and necessarily when there's litigation going on.
That's fair. I'm curious too if you see that there's going to be, obviously different states have different treatments for things, right? They have different ways they're going to handle it, different levels of friendliness towards any industry, but right. Towards Bitcoin miners specifically. You mentioned the China mining ban earlier. Obviously that brought a lot of mining to the U.S. Do you think we're going to see a lot of, let's say, jurisdictional arbitrage continue to happen just within the U.S. itself? States like Texas, states like Wyoming that are more favorable, like that just seems like they're going to suck any hash rate out of these other states if people know, hey, legally, from a legal standpoint, this is a friendly state to do business in because you're not going to have the rug pulled out from under you.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I don't think you're going to be seeing it in California and New York, I think it's going to be gravitating towards the Texas, the Floridas, the Wyomings, the Ohio's. That's where you'll see it predominantly, maybe even the Nevadas, or in Arizona, so where there's a lot of land, a lot of cheaper energy, good infrastructure, welcoming policies, taxes, tax-friendly policies, business-friendly policies. I think that's where you're going to see most of them. And you will see, I think, a distinction there.
Have you seen an increase or a decrease in some of the, let's say, frequency of these different lawsuits being brought against Bitcoin miners? Like, is it still kind of building up? Like, are we just in the early stages of this, or because of some of the work that's been done, are less of these getting filed? I have no sense for what stage are we at in this kind of this process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it depends, more miners, more data centers are popping up every day. And, there's the big ones and then there's small ones, the big publicly traded ones and then there's smaller ones. So, I don't, to say it's the big, I can't answer that. I'm not sure that I'm seeing necessarily an uptick. But I know there's these AI computing, huge data centers. I just saw this week that another, it's another place in small town Texas that has been bought by a data center, and they're just starting the construction now. So the more that these pop up, I do think the more, unfortunately, litigation will follow. And that's just the nature of, if you have a solvent company, the news says billion-dollar companies, things like that, they become a target for lawsuits, and so I haven't personally necessarily, I can't say that I've seen like this great giant uptick, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is one coming on the horizon.
So kind of going to the other side of the coin a little bit, because obviously you represent these businesses, right? These Bitcoin miners. There's obviously the other side of that, which is the people who are filing these. Now, granted, you mentioned that a lot of the times it's, let's say, lawyers that are kind of fishing for business, right? They're looking for people to bring together and make a case. But,
Right.
What have you seen from, because I assume that you've probably, talked to some of these actual people who are, making these complaints, or just these communities where these minors are operating. What are you seeing as far as the actual feeling on the ground from people? Like, are communities happy to have these minors? You think about it, and it's like, well, I don't know if I would want to be, right next door to a giant Bitcoin mining operation. But it's like there's going to be more and more of these and more data centers popping up everywhere. So, like, what are these actually doing for the communities? What are you seeing as far as the legitimate response from people who maybe don't have a different sort of axe to grind, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that it's very few. It's not that many. But those few have loud voices, right? And so, it's like you had mentioned earlier, how they'll have this big story on something, but then if you turn the camera, it's 5 people, right? But if you angle the camera a certain way, it can look like a giant crowd.
Well, yeah.
So it's not to say that, some people it's right. Like you say, no one wants to live next to something, but it's really, communicating to find out and determining what really is the issue. Like, okay, so if is this sound level okay? And communicating with the people, we have found in our experience in these different nuisance cases that we've been involved in, once you remedy one little area or one action by doing something, some enhancement to a facility, ton of them are like, thank you so much. That's all I needed. Thank you. And they are gone. But that doesn't mean that there aren't your token 4, 5, 6 that are still the loud ones, creating a lot of noise, going to the media, making the complaints and things like that. And some people just don't like, I was saying this in an Natalie's podcast too, they just don't take yes for an answer. You're like, oh, okay, well, we can't satisfy you. Like there was no satisfying you from the beginning. It was just a matter of shutting down the company. That's what you really want. And so it doesn't matter how many enhancements you make. And because everyone I've worked with is like, oh well, I want to be a good neighbor. And so you go through a huge expense changing certain things and making to make people happy, but then sometimes you just find that some people they can't be. Lawsuit was just from the beginning, you were never going to please them. But a lot of people outside of the small token few actually are very business friendly, and you'll see a lot of favorable comments in a lot of these sections. There's all these like Facebook posts and things like that in the comment section of Twitter posts and things like that, where people are like, they've helped bring so much tax money to the community. They have helped our emergency services by donations, and by hosting certain events in the community. In small town Texas, there's all these parades around the 4th of July. They will sponsor the entire thing. They'll sponsor children and scholarships. So there's a ton of giving back that isn't covered in the media, and all the favorable things that having a new business in town. And this isn't just, data center only, but just when a business comes to town, there's a lot of benefits that actually come from it. And, like we were talking earlier, even just in Texas in general, just stabilizing the grid, that's a benefit for all consumers here. And so anyway, yeah, I find that it's actually a very token few, but they make a lot of noise, fortunately.
Well, and when you start following the money back to Greenpeace specifically, it's like, we know that they got $5 million from Chris Larson, the chairman of the board of Ripple. Like, we know that they were being financed with the explicit intent of trying to demonize proof of work Bitcoin mining. Like this was their goal. And they, put up 5 million petrodollars to try and advance that goal. And so it's like, okay, you follow the money and you start to realize that even if there are these complaints, some of which may be completely reasonable and have remedies, but right. A lot of the overarching push is kind of being directed from some very specialized interests who really don't actually care at all about the energy usage or the nuisance or anything else. They just care about trying to make Bitcoin look bad because they have another, crypto token to try and sell to consumers. So it's like, I feel like that's such I wish that you got more coverage of that sort of thing in the media, but apparently not. That doesn't sell as well. Everybody wants to find the big bad guy, and Bitcoin and Bitcoin miners seem to be an easy target for that.
Yeah.
Do you see is there a legal challenge that you see kind of coming down the pipe potentially for Bitcoin miners that is not currently there, but something that you think that they're going to have to grapple with, in the future? Or do you think with this new administration, hopefully at least a federal level, you're going to see more friendliness towards industry more broadly, but Bitcoin mining specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the current administration has been pro Bitcoin. It's kind of been quite amazing. And then they've incentivized these data centers. Actually, what was the article? I'm trying to remember. But they want big business. So there is support there, at least publicly. I think, it's evolving. Framework right now is outdated, right? So hopefully once there'll be more clarity. So I'm not just talking in nuisance, but they need fair and predictable tax treatment, right? And they need banking and financial access, just like every other company. They need energy policies that acknowledge, Bitcoin's role in grid stability and, as an energy provider. And so once there's a well-structured environment that'll benefit Bitcoin companies, but also consumers, investors, and the broader economy, I think that'll support this emerging industry. But yeah, as far as trying to see on the pipe what they're going to face, well, I mean, it's hard to anticipate that. But I do think we're really encouraged now with the current administration that I do think people are listening and trying to understand and trying to educate themselves, and they're more open to a conversation. But at the end of the day, I mean, there has to be clarity in the laws, and it has to be consistent for all businesses. And I understand it's evolving in a new technology, but it's here to stay. So you have to move with the new technology. And so, I mean, listen, there's always going to be lawsuits with big business. I mean, they can run from just vicarious, when a lawsuit against an employee does something while they're under the course and scope of their employment, outsiders are going to sue. You're going to see suits like that for big companies all the time, but that's not specific to mining or anything like that. But it's not necessarily I don't know, other than just they have better laws for miners and more clarity so that they can comply, because it's not doesn't want to comply. These companies want to, but they just don't have. It's like the moving target or the whack-a-mole of what we don't know who we had to report to and what we're violating if you don't tell us. So,
I mean, I do hope that there is a big push for more clarity on this and a recognition that, as you said, these Bitcoin miners they're not just they're not stealing the electricity from Granny or something like
right.
that. They're only going to use the electricity when it's profitable for them to do so. If there's high demand for it and electricity is more expensive, they're not going to use it. They're going to shut off, and they can do that. And I mean, I think Texas is just such a fascinating, this is really a case study, I think, for other states to look at, to say, oh, look, they've been able to stabilize the grid, to use all this excess power. We don't have to use natural gas peaker plants or whatever, else. We can literally use Bitcoin miners, and they can bring jobs, and they can bring more tax revenue for us. It just seems like it's such an obvious thing. And that, to me, that's an indication of how early we still are. The fact that it's non-obvious to still the majority of people. If you go up to
Right.
10 random people on the street, you say, do you think Bitcoin mining is good or, good or bad? And like, first of all, half of them just won't know what you're talking about. And probably the other four will be like, I read an article that it's, boiling the oceans or something like that from 2020. And then the other person's going to maybe be like, I don't have an opinion on it. That's a small sample size, granted. But the point being that we are still so early in this. I don't know how long this takes though. Like it does come down to education, as you mentioned earlier, just not just for legislators, but for the average person, so that people will start to say, hey, we have an aluminum smelting operation that was shut down and we lost tons of jobs, back 10 years ago. We'd love to spin that back up again, and we want to bring in Bitcoin miners. But like, I think we're maybe a little ways off from getting that kind of public appeal for these things. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it moves, gradually, then suddenly, and all of a sudden everybody's clamoring to have a Bitcoin miner in their town. I don't know.
Right. I know. Maybe I know that Alcoa plant too, because we did some of that litigation way back in the day. But like the grid doesn't work like a household circuit breaker where there's just like unused electricity. It's just going to sit there, right? It's the excess energy is either used or wasted. So I think just making sure that people understand that, and how do we get people to understand that? That is the real question. Like, how do we get the mainstream media or to really listen? Texas Blockchain Council has come up with amazing, like even recently there was a report that came out that's it's like all the economic benefits of Texas. I'm butchering the name, but it's like every economic benefit of miners across the country and in the top like 20 states or something. And it gives all the economic benefits. It's like a 20-page report that was prepared by, I don't know who funded it, but it was prepared by an independent reporter. And I mean, not a reporter, I'm sorry, an independent like group that can statistically analyze that information. But how do you get that report into the news, into widespread news? Because there are a lot of really great reporting like that. And we will see it on Twitter or LinkedIn. They'll post something and someone's done a really deep dive. But the challenge is getting it outside of our Bitcoin echo chamber and getting it into the homes of like, the mom and pops. And so that's the challenge. And how do we make it interesting for those people? Until it impacts you, sometimes you just don't care. But I don't have the solution. I'm just identifying that I know that's an issue that we're having right now. And I do think it's important, kind of maybe even gaining a rapport with some of these reporters and saying, you really need to focus on this side of it. You're only telling one side of the story. And
it takes time. And I mean, the sad thing about the legacy media, and I think one of the reasons why it is really dying right now, is because they will only focus, like basically every legacy media outlet essentially became like, tried to replicate the BuzzFeed model. Like when BuzzFeed first came out and it was, lists of different things and it was all super clickbaity. And instead of being like, no, we're the mainstream media, we'll hold ourselves to a higher standard. They just went all in on that because everything was driven by the incentives for ad revenue, for clicks, right?
Exactly.
And I feel like, so now they went, from like they always used to like to show really dark and disturbing things on the news because again, that's what gets people to watch, people like the horror, the car crash they can't look away from. But then they just took it like to the umpteenth degree. But the problem is that kind of leads them in a direction where they're not actually incentivized to tell the truth or to tell the whole story, to tell it in an unbiased way, an objective way, which is what you're supposed to do. But I think that's really going to end up being their own demise. It's why they have lower viewership numbers than ever before. It's why they have lower, readership numbers than ever before. It's why independent journalists or some Joe Blow with a podcast can get better, viewership on a random video than, some local reporter will on their hard-hitting news segment about, all of the cats murdering pigeons in trees or whatever it is. Like it's a different world now. But I'm curious, what made Bitcoin click for you? Like, was it going to the conference and just like seeing that this was an actual, like this wasn't just something that Natalie was into, but this was like, oh wow, this is like this massive massive thing. There are people from all over the world who are into this. Or was there another moment where it just like finally hit you?
I just think the whole ethos behind it is just so cool. And the emerging technology is just so cool. And that's what I think made me gravitate toward it, really. Like, you can have financial self-sovereignty over something that cannot be manipulated. I mean, now we really see it with all the inflation, everything after with COVID and in 2021, like we were just on the heel. I mean, it was still, people still wearing masks in this first conference, I mean, this, and to all that money being printed at the time, that's when it really clicked. I'm like, okay, wait, hold on a second. So we can, we can hold the dollar's going to be inflated, but ours is this fixed money supply. It's halved every 4 years. Everyone understands supply and demand. And so I was like, I've got to get on board with this. This makes sense. And I think that, it's just maybe why I became an adopter. And then obviously I stayed true to just hodling because, it's the best performing asset of the last decade, as everyone says. So I just think that I'm going to continue to hodl. And then the people I've met in the industry is what made me stay. But I think the thing that clicked with me is really it just makes sense. How annoying is it when you go to a bank and you're like, hey, can I get X amount of dollars out? They're like, yeah, sure. We'll do it in 3 days. You're like, what? Why? See, it's your money. And why it took so long. Yeah. And so to be able to just transfer something like is that fast, I just can't believe we can't do that now. And so Bitcoin solves that problem.
It was amazing for me, like the first time transferring Bitcoin to self-custody, like the first time you really you send a Bitcoin transaction, I think is just it's a little bit like, it was nerve-wracking. Like I didn't have anybody walking me through it or anything like that. I'm just right. From my reading, and maybe I don't even think I watched a BTC Sessions tutorial before doing it like that. It was, I should have really, but once you do it and you're like, oh, I just did that. There was nobody's asking me to confirm anything. I'm not having to route this through anyone. It just happened. That is such a so galaxy cool. Brain light bulb moment where you're like, this is insane. This is really cool. I don't have to ask permission or forgiveness or anything else. I just don't have to ask. I can just do it. And I think that in an era where it seems like everything has a gatekeeper, whether that be your social media or your money or whatever else, to not have that is just so refreshing. And it's crazy to me still that we're probably at I don't know, less than 1% of global adoption.
Not wild.
That's just nuts. That's really crazy.
And then you deal with everyone saying, oh, I'm too late for it. I'm too late for it. I'm like, no, you have no idea.
Do you have those conversations with your friends still? Mine have haven't really even started talking to me about it too much yet this year. It's really a little bit of when it ran up to over 100K the first time. I had some friends reach out. But sure. What's the vibe you get from your non-Bitcoin circle? Are people talking about it more, or does it still feel kind of like it's being ignored again until it pumps like crazy and then they'll all come clamoring in?
Right. It always when it pumps is when everyone wants to start talking about it. But yeah, I mean, the general consensus among my circle is just, oh, I was too late for it. Dang it, I should have got in when it was, whatever, 30K or something even, and so, or they either will tell me stories about how they sold and they made some money selling, and I got, Bitcoin made me money, and I'm like, great, but hold, you're gonna wish you held.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just tell people to continue to hold. But yeah, I do remember the first time when I moved it from self custody. It's I held my breath. I'm like, please, I hope I did this right. But yeah, once you do it once, it becomes a little easier. But yeah, and I think predominantly a lot of people are like, well, now it's at 100K or so. I'm not going to make any money on it. But I'm like, stack those sats, friends.
That's the thing that always blows my mind is you start to realize how short people's attention spans really are, because it's if you would have asked that same person 4 years ago, do you want to buy, or however many years ago, it's like, whatever, like Bitcoin always seems too expensive, but it's always in retrospect really cheap. Like it will always seem too expensive at the time, but then you go forward in time a little bit and you look back and it will always seem really cheap. Like, oh, why didn't I buy? Why didn't I buy more?
Right.
But it's like humans just, why do we have this like insanely, well, not everyone, but many, it seems, have this just, it's like they're only looking at like the next week, month, year. I mean, maybe that's just a function of how broken our system is, though, that it's like, well, if it's not going to make me a millionaire overnight, then like I'm going to look for something else. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that is probably part of the ethos too of Bitcoiners is just long-term thinkers. Yeah, we need a psychologist. You know, we need someone on to tell us why we just can't think so far in advance, or why we have such regret. I mean, they probably have all kinds of studies on this because of, related to like gamblers too, when do you leave the table, that kind of thing. So I don't know. It's but yeah, you need a psych person to really study us.
Yeah, there's well, I'm sure. I mean, what the one that I can think of that got widely publicized was the article where they were like, a clinical psychologist says that Bitcoin holders possess what they call like the dark triad of personality traits. It was like narcissism, like this is where like the Bitcoin psychopath thing like came from, because of course, as Bitcoiners do, somebody insults them, thinking they're insulting them, and they're like, you know what, actually being like a toxic psychopath sounds pretty cool. Yeah, okay, so we're all just toxic Bitcoin psychopaths. Like that's the best thing to do, though. Somebody insults you and just turn it around, wear it as a badge, and take their power away from them. And luckily, Bitcoiners are very good at that.
Right, right. Been dealing with it quite a long time, so
yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Speaking of ethos more broadly, I'm curious, do you see kind of a natural intersection between law and Bitcoin? Do you see this as something that like are the reasons that you got into law, do you think somehow also intertwined with the reasons that Bitcoin attracted you? Like, do you see a sort of a confluence there?
Well, I can see it's really, really interesting thought. And the law at its best, it's supposed to be the ultimate equalizer. You have a right to a fair trial, right to due process. Just like anyone has the right to use the Bitcoin network, right? So there is that similarity there. The system doesn't care, if you're rich or poor or what gender you are. The same will apply with Bitcoin, So I think Bitcoin, it does operate on that absolute fairness. There's no bailout that's going to come, no discrimination or favoritism, whereas you'll see in traditional finance that, banks, your banking, your credit, your investment opportunities are based a lot on privilege and things like that, which that doesn't apply, and it shouldn't apply in the legal scheme, and definitely not in Bitcoin. So, but I guess the real distinction with law and, as much as law is, it's supposed to have a right to a fair trial subject to 12 members of a jury, and 12 members of a jury, all come from different backgrounds. They've all had different experiences. They have different biases, and and a judge, sometimes you get a judge on a bad day, sometimes you get a judge on a good day and stuff like that. So that's a real distinction between like the law and Bitcoin. But I mean, yeah, technically, yeah, the law is supposed to be an equalizer, but you have, in my experience in trials, you do voir dires, and it's all voir dires very different, or jury selection is very different depending on what state you're in or what judge you have. So sometimes I have experienced being in jury selection for, I'm not even joking, a month and a half. It is the most comprehensive jury and jury selection and that I've ever experienced. But then I've also been in trials where you get to ask like one question. So you have to think, I mean, the reason why you even have voir dire and you have the jurors there is so that you can smoke out anyone that may have a bias that's going to prevent them from being able to evaluate only the evidence that's put in front of them during trial. Because everyone has a bias, no matter everyone's had a different experience. So you come into the courtroom and we acknowledge them. We say, please, we acknowledge that everyone has these biases and that you've come in with different experiences. But the question really is, can you set that aside? Can you set that aside? And for the time that you're actually in the courtroom, can you listen to only the evidence and then apply whatever evidence that you hear in this courtroom, evaluate it as you may, if it's credible to you, or if it's not, you can dismiss it, but then apply it to what the law is that you are given at the end of trial. And that is when you have to come down to your decision. And that is what you base your decision on, only and only that. And that's what you have to make sure that you have a jury. But sometimes, sometimes you don't get to do a voir dire like that. And sometimes you just get the first 12 in the box, and that's what you have to go with. And you're like, okay, that's rock and roll with that. So that's kind of a distinction between law and Bitcoin. But there's some alignment there. But it's the best we can do. It's it's the judicial system that we have, and I think it's the best one out there. But it's not without its flaws.
I just learned a new word today, which is voir dire. So now I've got a new one in my repertoire. That's fascinating though, because I was really, as a I am not a legally educated and trained person, and so I was thinking of it very much from like the high level, like what is the law supposed to be? But you bring up a great point, which is like there's what the law is supposed to be and who it's supposed to protect, which is everybody. But then there's the realities on the ground, which is people. Humans, we have biases, and it's kind of it's a great analogy though, just given that it's like, okay, Bitcoin removes those humans from the law, like the code is the law, right? And that's the whole thing. It's like you don't need a jury selection to determine the blocks. It's whoever discovered it first, and so I think it's interesting. Maybe Bitcoin's a model for what the law should be, perhaps. On the law side, I'm curious. I saw just today, I saw this guy who was in Belgium, and he'd posted a tweet. I still say tweet. He'd posted a post, I guess, on X. Just posts, which just sounds lame. But he had posted on X that basically Belgium uses these AI tools to basically, I guess, surveil and then analyze group chats. And they give you a toxicity rating for like if you're saying things that this AI trawler deems as racist, sexist, whatever it may be. But there's all these slip ups to it. Like you could be quoting somebody else and saying like this, like what a moron this guy is for saying this, but it would still, because it had all these toxic remarks in it, it would mark it as toxic. Point is, he got a very toxic score. He's currently facing like a massive fine and jail time. And I was just wondering, like, do you think that we're going to start seeing more like AI involvement in law? And I listened to yours and Natalie's show, and you guys talked about kind of using AI as a tool for your legal work. But I mean more so like at a higher level, like, is an AI judge going to remove the human component that you just mentioned, like remove that fallibility, or does that just add another layer of problems? Because it's like, well, who trained the AI? What were they trained on? Have you thought about that at all? Like, what does that like? It seems a little bit like cyberpunk dystopian, but like, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I do know that there is a case. This was it was a DUI case or something. It was this massive case, probably like a 2-day trial, 1-day trial. They use, this is here in America, I'll have to find it, we'll have to Google it or something after this, but he put in an AI in his ear. This is a non-lawyer, put an AI in his ear, and it was asking, like the judge would ask questions and it would give the answer, like he would wait for the AI to tell him what to say, and then he would say it. Anyway, it was apparently a huge fail, big flop. Like it wasn't accurate, hallucinating. They probably just hadn't worked out the kinks yet. But it was an interesting case study to try and to see what would happen. But that's more on assisting with, maybe a legal argument. Someone doesn't want to have to pass the bar to represent themselves, sua sponte, another term.
There you go.
But so. maybe that offers people who maybe don't want to have legal counsel, it would offer them the opportunity to maybe have the law in their ear, but they just have to work out the tweaks of it. Now, to answer your question about whether or not a judge is going to be replaced with an AI, I absolutely do not think that will ever happen. I don't think the founders were even contemplating that at the time. I think a lot would change if we were, but although, there are small claims cases, small claims court, and that is, depending on what jurisdiction you are, I don't know, most jurisdictions like $5,000 or less. So this is for people that don't jam up the big court systems with, or the dockets of a big court for a small claim case. And you go stand their judges in small claim case, but you don't have a jury. You just you show up, you don't need a lawyer for it. And it's kind of like the people's court, that you see on TV or Judge and things like that. Perhaps a Judge Jude, I can see something like that where it's, a dispute of whatever, $2,000 rent issue, landlord tenant issue or something like that. Maybe in years from now, we'll be open to having someone just, rule on it. Save a lot of money, take over jobs. I don't know. There's so many things I'm thinking through right now, but I think there might be a market there in the future for small claims, very small claims, but, or small disputes, but even mediation, because, sometimes you're required, it's called court mandated mediation. And sometimes the judge, before they'll see you, say, go hire a mediator or use a public mediator that the state pays for to try to talk it out first. Don't jam up our court docket right now with something like that. So a mediator could be an AI, where, someone writes everything they want to write on one side, and then another one writes everything that they think is wrong on the other side. And then you have a mediator that, get issues a ruling. So anyway, let's coin that. We'll go into business together.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
You need an NDA. Everyone sign one.
Yep. I'm going to have to delete this part from the podcast. We can't have this idea getting out there.
So yeah, I was talking to kind of genius, actually.
Actually, not a bad idea. But this is the crazy thing about, I feel like we're at this time where like technology is like, I guess technology always seems like it's moving fast, probably to everybody at every point in history. Like, when the telephone was coming out, they were probably like, my God, things are really moving at high speed here. Like cars driving instead of the horse-drawn carriages. It's like, we're living in the future.
Yeah.
But I think that rate of change accelerates, and it gets harder and harder to predict actually how much is going to change and how quickly it will change. But either way, I think we've got ourselves a great business idea on our hands.
We'll start a mediator AI company.
I love it. I love it. Paul, I want to be conscious of your time here. I did want to just ask also, is there any advice that you have? Because you've been able to now transition a successful law career into a successful law career in Bitcoin. Like, I think there's a lot of Bitcoiners out there who have a very particular skill set, are highly skilled in whatever their industry may be, and kind of wish I wish I could somehow find a way to incorporate Bitcoin into this. Do you have any advice for people about, just lessons you learned along this process? Like maybe even just how did you actually make the decision to say, you know what, I'm going to take my skill set and move it to start to work in Bitcoin? How do you actually get there?
Yeah. Well, in honesty, it took a while. It really did. It took a couple of, like I said, I try to do the estate planning thing. It just didn't work out. It just didn't make sense. So, sometimes you just have to test an area and know when to walk away and say, okay, you know what, maybe I have to wait for the opportunity to come to, or to me, identify it later. It'll make sense when it pops up. And that's kind of what ended up happening for me. So I just really stayed in contact, kept my, obviously listening to podcasts and things like that. I would have ideas. Like, do you think they need help in this area? Well, I don't really do that, and I, obviously don't want to take on a case that I don't feel like I'm competent in handling. So you just have to kind of keep your ear to the ground. And that's really what happened. I was talking to Natalie one day and she told me about, some nuisance cases. And I was like, wait, I've tried multiple nuisance cases like this. and then it's not like I pitched to anyone or anything like that. It wasn't, but it was just becoming involved. I was involved in the Texas Blockchain Council at the time. So that's how I got the referral. So, it's things like that. Because I guess my advice then, if you're asking for my advice, it would to become involved in as many things, Bitcoin related possible. And then write down, you can almost think about, okay, what are my skill sets? What have I been trained to do? And where's their overlap? And it might not be automatic, but I'm part of this Dallas Bitcoin meetup group. So I talk to people about that. I tell them what I do. Over time, it'll just come, it'll eventually come to you. Business will come to you. Someone will have a great idea, and talk. So, it might not be overnight, but I give it time, and I think there'll be you'll find an overlap.
I think that's great advice. And I mean, just my personal experience has been that, and maybe it won't stay this way forever, because right now the, Bitcoiner community is still relatively small on a grand scale, but Bitcoiners are so willing to make connections and to reach out a helping hand, or like it's not like a zero sum mentality. It's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats mentality. It's positive sum. It's like, oh, I can help you with this, or like it just, I've had a very positive experience in that regard, and it sounds like you have too. And so I would also encourage people, like, Bitcoin needs as many people working for it as possible, because like, we are the network ultimately. And so I think that's I hope that more people hear this story and say, you know what, okay, this is what I need. I need to get more involved. I need to talk to more people. I need to see if I can put my skills to use.
Yeah, and another thing, like for example, just with that great example, it is the people. I love the people of like the Bitcoin world. I can't emphasize that enough. Everyone is so interesting and just thought provoking, and just so many ideas conversations are all around ideas, and I just love the people of this community too. And so that's enough. So through the community, maybe I don't do a certain area of law, for example. So someone came to me within, our friend group and needed some amending to a structure from an LP to a master feeder. Okay, I don't do hedge fund work, but I have a colleague that helped do that and got it done in 2 weeks. So that's another way. And now she knows what I do, and I know that she can do that. And so through the the web of friendships that you make in this world, and learning what everyone does, always finding out, whenever you have a conversation, we always find out what they do. And then you send them stuff. And I'm one of those people that believes if you send something out, it will return. It's like a boomerang. So send out help, give value to other people, and then it'll come back to you. Maybe not through that person, but through another way. And it's relationships. The world turns on relationships.
I'm with you on that. You put good out into the world, and good tends to come back, and usually comes back even more than you put out. So it's, yeah, I could not agree more with that. Last thing, and then because I appreciate you not having any billable hours for me here for taking your time. Is there without holding you to this, and because I don't know what you're actually allowed to say as a lawyer, like if you can like give legal advice without it being legal advice, like financial people, not financial advice, either way,
right?
Like is
none
there
of
like
legal advice?
Yeah, none of this is legal advice, but is, as a lawyer, is there anything that you have that's like generalized legal, not advice, guidance? Is that a word you can use? Like something that you would look at this and say, like, this is something like you should be aware of specifically as a Bitcoiner. I don't know if, I know a lot of your work deals obviously with businesses, but like on an individual level, is there anything that you look at and you're like, this is something Bitcoiners should either maybe be really careful about or be aware of? Is there anything like that?
Oh gosh.
Don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, and it just individualized what people. I just stay on top of the exchanges that you use for like holding Bitcoin. Because there are some, just, I don't know, maybe because there are issues with them freezing some of the assets, and there are issues with like asset recovery, and they won't allow you to liquidate it. And sometimes they'll send it to the state. So there are issues there. So make sure you trust where you're putting, where you're buying, where you're holding, and things like that. That's because that might be something that's going to be an issue long term. And I know that they're trying to figure out the kinks on that, but I don't know, that kind of sometimes keeps me up at night a little bit.
Okay, so the advice there is take custody of your own keys, put it in cold storage, and make sure that you don't need to worry about an exchange freezing you. Yeah, that's I see a lot of tweets about that, or posts about that, excuse me, and it's not something I want to need to deal with, because it also seems like for most of these exchanges, especially like the big ones like Coinbase, like you're just never going to be able to get somebody from customer support on the line. Like they just don't care. They've got some algorithm that flags your funds, and then like good luck. Like it's, not your keys, not your coins, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well,
so I don't know if that's very helpful, but
no, I think giving the advice to not trust exchanges is always helpful for people, especially if they're new to the space. Paula, I really appreciate you taking the time here out of your day. Yeah. Where should people find you? I'll make sure to link your X account. We've got to get you on Nostr also. I'm going to hold you to that. I'm going to keep badgering you about it. But anywhere else you want to send people, anything you want to direct people towards?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can find me I work at a law firm called Nelson Mullins, and so you can just Google Paula Pendley at Nelson Mullins. You can find my bio there. It has all of my contact information. I'm on X. Paula Pendley Law is my handle, and LinkedIn, all the usual suspects of places that you can find me. And
on Nostr soon, which I will hold. Yes, I will be holding you to that.
Yeah, I'll download it after this pod.
There we go. That's what I love to hear. Well, Paula, thank you so much for your time. Great catching up. Hope to see you. I'll see you at the Bitcoin conference. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll see you in May. Hopefully before then. That's too long. But
yeah, I agree. We'll have to do something about that so we can brainstorm this new business venture we have as well.
Exactly. We need to bring Carla on board. We'll all get together.
Absolutely. I'm here for it.
Okay.
Paula, thanks so much. It was great talking to you.
Great talking to you. Bye.
And that's a wrap on this Bitcoin Talk episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. If you are a Bitcoin-only company interested in sponsoring the Bitcoin Podcast, head to bitcoinpodcast.net/sponsor or send an email to hello@bitcoinpodcast.net. If you are enjoying the Bitcoin Podcast and find it valuable, give it a boost on Fountain, a 5-star review wherever you're listening, or better yet, share this show with your network so more people can learn about Bitcoin. Or don't. Bitcoin doesn't care, but I sure do appreciate it. You can grab links in the show notes to watch or listen to this show wherever you get your podcasts, or go to bitcoinpodcast.net/podcast. And you'll also find the links to follow me and the show on Nostr and on X. Bitcoin is scarce. There will only ever be 21 million. But Bitcoin podcasts are abundant. So thank you for spending your scarce time to listen to the Bitcoin Podcast. Until next time, stay free.